And we're live to review the episode that some might call Damp Squid, and others might say, no, it's a good character piece. So, over to Jeff.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? It sounded like you said something about squid.
No, Damp Squib.
What's that mean?
It means a sort of like an anticlimactic ender.
Oh, okay.
Well,
anyway, this is Homicide: Life on the Street, Season 7, Episode 22, which is overall the 122nd and final episode of Homicide. And I'm going to read a brief recap, and then I'm actually going to read a review, at least some of it, not the entire thing, because it's got a few things that spoil stuff from the movie, so I'm not going to read that part. But anyway, so the title is Forgive Us Our Trespasses. It was written by Tom Fontana and directed by Alan Taylor, and originally aired May 21st, 1999. So exactly 1 month before my son was born. And here is the recap. Shepard and Bayless await the trial of Luke Ryland, the internet killer. A number of delays keep the hearing from being held. The last time it is because Danvers can't make it due to being held up in another trial. Because of a technicality in the law, Ryland is set free. Bayless is outraged and winds up Danvers down the stairs, who later threatens to put Bayless up on charges. G's daughter, Teresa, arrives to help with the celebration of her father's promotion to captain. G asks Bayless to apologize to Danvers, and Bayless declines. Lewis and Falzone look into the murder of a drug addict whose husband looks like the most probable suspect. The victim's mother-in-law isn't very cooperative, and her sister is a nun who thinks her brother-in-law is an architect. G worries about whether or not he will be able to perform in his new role as captain of the Property Crimes Division. Later, he turns down the promotion. Bayless and Lewis have words about the way each other handle their memories of the past. Munch and Billy Lou get married with G and Ballard as the witnesses. However, Munch's 6 weeks of celibacy result in a premature end to the wedding night activities. The drug addict's husband is found, questioned, and charged. The nun asks to see her brother-in-law so that she may forgive him for his actions. Lewis reconsiders his position on Shepard when his comment about the nun's ability for forgiveness and Falzone's response gets him thinking. Bayless warns Luke Ryland that he'll be watching him. Ryland says he is leaving town, but Bayless can always find him on the internet. Bayless talks with Munch about Gordon Pratt, the man who shot Bolander, Howard, and Felton, and confesses to Munch that he once suspected that Munch might have been the one to kill Pratt. Bayless also goes to visit Danvers and apologizes. Lewis asks Shepard to partner with him on a case. Bayless packs up his things and quietly leaves the homicide unit. The body found is Luke Ryland's. So that's the recap, and I'm going to read this review before I turn it over to Ben for his thoughts. This was written by Dan Heaton, and I'm not sure, something website called the Idiot Box. So anyway, Homicide: Life on the Street was created as a show about thinking cops with actors who didn't fit the typical mold for network TV. They were overweight, balding, and dressed like real cops. The landmark television series was highly influential and set the stage for captivating shows like The Wire and The Shield. By the time it reached its 7th season, Homicide had changed dramatically from its original format. The basic model of investigating murders remained, but the cast was younger and prettier. Even so, original cast members Clark Johnson, Kyle Secor, Yaphet Kotto, and Richard Belzer kept it from feeling too much like a departure. The final season was its most inconsistent and had low points that you wouldn't expect. The killings were more sensational and action scenes became more commonplace. Even with those misfires, there are still plenty of interesting storylines during the last episode. Bayless returns after a gunshot wound and has a more zen outlook to life. This calmer approach is frequently tested, and it comes to a head by the finale. Giardello's son Michael joins the squad and has issues to work out with his dad. Lewis loses faith in his partner Shepard after she loses her gun and gets beaten down. The last arc is typical of this season and doesn't totally work, but the actors sell the material. Even when the writing lets them down, the cast remains strong right up until the end. It's that personal connection with the actors that has made Homicide so beloved 20 years after its premiere. So this was obviously written about 5 years ago. Anyway, entitled Forgive Us Our Trespasses, the season finale has effective callbacks to both the pilot and key moments throughout the series. Bayless deals with the limits of the job when the serial killer Luke Ryland is set free due to a technicality. He's always gotten more personally involved in cases than his colleagues, and that approach creates a dangerous obsession if it isn't controlled. Ryland taunts Bayless about his future activities, and he starts to reconsider if right and wrong is such a clear delineation. A counterpoint is G, who loves running the homicide unit. This joy clashes with his career aspirations, so he finally decides to take a promotion into property crimes. Unlike Bayless, he has no doubts about what they do. The detectives speak for those who can't and face the demons that come with the job. His challenge is recognizing that moving up the ladder might destroy his identity as a cop. Creator Tom Fontana wrote this episode, moves briskly to the poignant finale scene. That ending closely mirrors the show's very first shots and uses the same line from Lewis while examining a body. That's what's wrong with this job. It ain't got nothing to do with it. Fontana gives the best moments to his original actors, Kyle Secor, Clark Johnson, and Richard Belzer. Munch is getting married to Billy Lou, and the comic scenes are perfect for Belzer. He also thrives in the dramatic moments. Even without knowing for sure, the key moment is Bayless's conversation with Munch about the police shooting from back in the third season. That violent moment was the first time the creators used a gunfight on the show. It helped to change the tone, but it also delivered powerful reactions from the characters. Bayless was the investigator on that shooting, and his understanding of what... Actually, that's not entirely true. He was the investigator on the shooting of the man who was was the suspect. It's the accurate thing. But anyway, his understanding of what likely happened plays a key role in his decision. Belzer plays the discussion perfectly and shows the difference between Munch and Bayless. Avenging his fellow detectives was a no-brainer for Munch, while Bayless agonizes about a choice. Despite the issues with the seventh season, Homicide concludes on a very strong note. Its original mission statement to delve into the emotional turmoil faced by homicide detectives remains in place. Watching an angry Bayless decide what's right perfectly fits with this perspective. As the camera lifts up to the sky during the final shot, it's clear that these characters will continue to speak for the dead. Lewis and Munch are perfect examples of guys who have just the right mentality to face the evil inside everyone. Bayless is a different type of guy and risks succumbing to his demons. The rapid montage of shots from throughout the series as Bayless exits the stage is brilliant and exemplifies Homicide's ultimate success. It's a thankless job with incredible barriers, yet these guys keep plugging away to discover the truth. And I'm going to end there because the last paragraph is stuff about the movie. I will reserve my comments for after Ben and Bradley, but I'll say a slight spoiler that I think a really strong performance by Kyle Secor in the finale. He really, I think, carries the episode in many ways. Does a really good job of showing a change in Bayless, because he sounds different than he ever really has before in this one, and so it really kind of gives you, and even with if they didn't have the flashback clips, would be a good indication of how much he's changed in the 7 years. So anyway, Ben, what'd you think?
Well, I mean, when I talked about the cast, I mean, Bayless is not exactly bad looking, especially in the early seasons. So,
yeah, I mean, that was obviously a slight overgeneralization, but I think their point still stands that obviously the characters that were replaced were the ones that they considered less telegenic.
Yeah, I mean, we actually got that when they brought in the woman. What is it? The NF woman. Morgan thinks she's NF, and probably married to one of those. Oh, I forgot what they're called. Who's the guy that played the ISTP?
You got to be able to know somebody's name, Ben, or you can't get any of the references.
This
you
guy
can't be like the woman who's married to the guy who.
It's just those two. I can't remember their names. Those two. They're married in real life, I think.
I think you're talking about Russet.
Yeah, Russet. That's it. Russet. Well, they brought her in
was
pretty.
Played by Isabella Hoffman, who used to be involved with Daniel Baldwin. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Who played Felton.
Right. That's it, Felton. So. They got rid of the guy early on, didn't they? The short Italian guy who you think resembled an NTJ with his conspiracy theories.
Yeah, Crissetti.
Crissetti. I actually think that first of all, they left out the fact that Bayless was provoked by being called an asswipe, and he pushed him, and then he fell down the steps. So it wasn't like he directly went up to him and say, "You arsehole for not turning up," and then whacked him one. There was a little bit of understandable.
in the moment.
Yeah, I think a little bit out of character for Danvers to call a guy who's about a foot taller than him an asswipe.
Maybe, but I think that why it came as such a shock in that moment is because they don't think of Bayless as being a really physically aggressive guy. So the fact that he react that way was still surprising. And so if it was somebody like Felton or even Kellerman or G, Danvers is not likely to have said that to.
No, definitely not to those three, especially Kellerman and.
Yeah, and that's kind of the continuing thing about this final episode is that it's demonstrating how much Bayless has changed from the kind of wide-eyed innocence he seemed to be and somewhat timid that he started.
Also, it was set up though, so I'm sort of contradicting myself here, but I don't mind. Where he did talk about the fact that he's hardly got any sleep, and I know from my own experience that when you don't have much sleep, your patience can really get shortened, and you can say things that are regrettable, especially when he's frustrated with him. So I thought early on they sort of got it right, where early on they had a lot of wit and it was funny, like all the stuff dealing with the woman at the door, behind the door, who was in a wheelchair. That was well played. I thought the performance by the nun was good. What else? Oh yes, and there was a good line from Lewis when he's talking to the nun. You want to forgive the man? Sister, with all due respect, the man is a piece of crap. So I like that bit. There was a feeling that it was, from a plot point of view, a little bit of a damp squid, a little bit disappointing, just from a case, trying to solve a case point of view. But if you look at the bigger picture and see it as the final episode, and really you're following the arc of several characters, such as the two G's, Lewis with his partner Shepard. Yet again, you have Stivers not being given much to do. I mean, she didn't get given much to do this season, but we can talk about that when we review the season. What else? Who else had an arc? Yes, Bayliss and Munch. There was intimations. It was left open that Munch may have bumped off Pratt because he shot 3 of the detectives, including his friend Bolander, and it was left open at the end as well as to maybe could Bayliss possibly have bumped off Ryland, I think his name is. Mm-hmm. So that aspect was good, leaving it open. Oh yes, and there was also some moments in the dialogue where they didn't write it on the nose, and so they would say things like, it was recalling the conversation with Frank. Frank said I didn't have a killer's instinct, and then it just said he was wrong about that. And then he didn't then say, because now I have to. It's like they never went on to explain things that they didn't have to, and sort of write down to the audience. And I remember 2 instances of that where they didn't overwrite the dialogue. So that's my thoughts on it. What do you think, Budley?
Well, I liked the episode. I definitely liked. I did go back, per Jeff's suggestion. I went back and watched the first episode, and it really did make me appreciate this episode a lot more. It sort of made me sad that they were representing all of the stuff that happened throughout the 7 seasons, 7 seasons, right?
Yeah, but the first one was 9, and the second one was 4, and even English people are saying that's a little bit short.
Of Homicide seasons? I don't
Yeah,
know what
because
you're talking
it was
about.
to make it up to 13, you see, because it was a mid-season replacement. And so then it came back for a second season. Then you got 13, half a season, and then all the ones after that. So season 3 to 7 sort of varied between 20 to 22 episodes.
Oh, sorry, I'm not talking about episodes. I'm talking about seasons. 7 seasons.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that early on, though, the second season was 4 episodes,
Right.
and the first season was just 9 episodes because it was a mid-season replacement for another series that got cancelled.
Sure. Yeah, but it made me really sad that I hadn't seen more of it. But I mean, I do get.
Can watch the others.
Well, obviously, I know that. But obviously, I do.
The good part about that, though, is that it was nice to get your perspective on these 7 season episodes from a perspective of somebody that was new to the series as opposed to seeing it from the beginning. So I think your perspective was a little maybe less, not jaded exactly, but just it was a little fresher to you. Whereas, for Ben and me, especially me, because I've seen it multiple times, it's like we saw more of like it not being as good as some earlier stuff as opposed to seeing it a little bit fresher. So it was kind of good to get, that perspective from you anyway.
Right. I mean, it's not so. It's not that I'm so disappointed that I hadn't seen it all that it's like I couldn't enjoy it. Nothing that extreme. It's just I really get the sense that you're coming up on a character's basically conclusion of his 7-year stint in Homicide, and he's referencing all of this stuff, and the whole character has a sense of a journey and loss, and you're only familiar with some of it, so. Obviously, I didn't get a full effect,
Right.
but I still enjoyed it a lot. And I always thought Bayless was like one of my favorite characters. So I thought it was nice that I got to see more of his journey and not so much some of the other. I know. I think him being a feeler might have something to do with it. And Pemberton being a feeler, and them always being like relatively emotionally volatile compared to some of the other characters who are, I guess, are more built for the constant disappointment that being a police officer entails. And it's really nice to get to see Bayless sort of react to various negligence. I think that him being let off on a technicality was definitely negligent. I'm not sure if it can all be placed on Danvers, but I do think it's rather odd that no one would be aware that he'd be let off in the 180 days technicality. I feel like in real life someone would have said something,
especially especially when it looked like that guy was like a serial murderer.
Right.
Like done it multiple times. So it's like you might want to prioritize this guy over other cases.
Mm-hmm. And I think the whole case is being like prolonged. I think that's a reality of people mess up, but I do think it's a bit too much to suggest that no one would be aware of him being let out that way. Sorry, go on, Jeff.
The thing that was missing, I think, in all that is not that couldn't happen, but that many times when we've had something like that occur, including Ryland's initial case, is there would have been a lot more media attention. There would have been an immediate we should have had the media, at least them watching on the TV saying something about how this the system had just let this serial killer loose, and people were maybe panicking about it or something. There should have been more of a big deal about that from a media standpoint, instead of it seeming like it was almost like it's just Bayless's personal torture. It's like, no, there would have been a little bit more outrage from other people besides Bayless that this happened.
Yeah.
But I think if they had made it a sort of Red Bull case, then it would make it even more incredible that they hadn't prioritized the case.
Right.
Yeah, I think, the only way I can say that it works in that aspect is if their point is just about the attention span of the public, that they're, that it's like, well, it happened long enough ago that people aren't even really thinking about it that much anymore. The point they were trying to make, that's one thing, but I don't think they really stress that either. So they need to go one direction or the other. Either have, a public outrage rather than just Bayless's personal feelings, or have characters talk about the fact that nobody seemed to notice besides him or something, rather than just leave it, unmentioned.
Maybe they can't prioritize it, and maybe there's a strict thing, and like it came in this order, so it has to be dealt with in this order.
Yeah.
So
that the law they mentioned is a real Maryland state law. I'm not sure whether it's been changed since then or not, but at the time it was in fact a real law about the number of days that you were allowed to be held without trial.
yeah, and it might also isn't it in the Constitution about the right to a speedy trial?
Yeah, although it's not specified exactly what that means, of course, so it's left open to interpretation. But I think the Supreme Court has ruled on that before. I don't know the exact, comments that they made or anything about that, how much is what's considered a speedy trial. But
Right. So that's what you can. I mean, so that's why you have people like. Quick side point. That's why you can put. But that's like with Guantanamo Bay. It's not actually on the United States, so it's not actually subject to the Constitution, where you got to charge them before after a certain number of days. Anyway, so.
Yeah, but I mean, I very much I did enjoy the incompetence of people in general, and just what he didn't get delivered. Like one time he didn't get delivered to the courtroom. Another time, I forgot what happened the first time, but the second time he didn't get delivered, and then the third time Danvers was held up in another court. I think that's all perfectly legitimate and realistic.
So Jeff, was this sort of stuff mentioned in the book? Because you've heard it.
what do you mean by this sort of stuff? You mean like a trial?
Well, things like this particular thing of like people waiting a certain number of days and have not done it speedily enough, and then the charges get dismissed.
I don't remember a specific mention of that. I mean, it could have been if it was very brief, but I don't remember there being any particular. There wasn't any like focus on that in the book that I remember. But there was quite a bit about juries and dealing with the fact that a lot of the juries that they dealt with were biased against the police in their judgment, and so they had problems convicting people that they were convinced were murderers because there was sort of a suspicion of the cops within the community that would tend to get some people off. So there was quite a bit and some of that was featured in the episode that was called Justice, the one where the cop's father was shot and the guy got off because the jury basically was tired and wanted to go home.
Yeah. So Ben, were you going to say something else? Or?
No, not really. The moment has passed.
All right. So yeah, that's the beginning of the episode. I think the whole Danvers being pushed downstairs. I think he just he got pushed and he fell. I don't think Bayless wanted to throw him downstairs like people were trying to suggest. And and I don't think Danvers would have gotten the face of anyone else who wasn't Bayless. I think that's kind of blown out of proportion.
I might have added though, right at the end of the apology, but don't you dare call me an asswipe again.
But even the fact that he didn't do that, it just goes to show you, that
he's Bayless.
He's very much he's Bayless. He's not something else. There's someone else rather. Yeah,
Frank might have said that. I don't know who. Maybe I don't know if Frank would have apologized. It would have been hard for Frank to apologize, although maybe not, because. What do you think in that situation, Jeff? Would you think Frank would have apologized?
I don't know, because I think about I actually did rewatch the first episode before I watched this one to sort of like just bring the bookends of the show together, and I think of Frank in the parking garage, where he refuses to go upstairs to get the other car, And I'm like, it kind of depends on what mood he was in. Because it's possible he would have reached a point where he said, well, I need to go ahead and apologize to him, especially when G made it an order, or basically said he was going to make it an order. Because, Pembleton basically would, he realized, if G's law was in place, so he had a choice, either do that or quit.
Now, I think if it was Felton, though, he'd be like, I don't really want to apologise to Felton, but I do respect G, and so it'd be like pretty hard for him. I like.
Yeah, well, it's like the line he says in the first episode when Pembleton says, so, because G's talking about the bosses, and he says, so they kick you, you kick me, and then G says, well, think of it this way: now you can kick Felton.
Yeah, I think one thing they could have done is like kept up more like sizzling dialogue between Felton and Frank. More of that, more the kind of stuff that happened in the first episode. I would have liked to have seen, because I always like it when Frank has an opponent who's up to his level. And you got that a bit when you had Alfie Woodard's character, who was euthanizing people, and she was like at the same level as Frank. It was a good contest between them. So I always like to see that. It's much better than when Frank's, punching down.
Yeah, but what else? I'm trying to recall the episode. So that happened, and then I wasn't sure. I mean, didn't have much invested in either of the G's, so I couldn't really get into I couldn't really feel anything for G, saying that he was up for this big promotion and just decides to turn it down because he's like, yeah, that's not what I meant to be doing. I did think it was more interesting that Liz G said, we both belong to the streets, and he just needs to figure out how to get back there. He knew he wasn't like done being a police officer just because he left the FBI, but he just didn't know like what to do next or where to go from there. So I thought that was more interesting. Yeah, I think it was. I mean, you almost knew that G wasn't going to take their job.
Yeah. Yeah, it was building up to that. And also the way they dealt with that, where they didn't make a big thing of it, they just had sort of Stuart Garty say, oh, after all that time, so it's like, it was subtly implied. So, Jeff, we've not talked much about G Jr., but which type or temperament do you think he most resembles?
No, you're supposed to tell me what you think.
Well, I would think Guardian-ish, really. I don't think just that as a process of elimination, because the other ones don't really fit.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, are you thinking like ISFJ? Because we've got, I think, Bayless and Gardy are both ISFJs, so we have some definite examples there. Mike is a little bit harder to figure.
Yeah, I think.
Wait, you think Gardy's an ISFJ?
I think so, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's just that with G Jr., it's not sort of written enough at the depth of the other ones, and so you sort of just get the idea of like Guardian maybe plus good acting from him, and he seems to be more a product of someone who's put in a situation, and so he's sort of like the product of his role, where it's like this is someone who's in the position of being the son of G Senior and somebody who's working for the FBI. So it's like, well, what really could he have done differently that was indicative of his character? He did seem to be, but sort of like anyone can be ethical. I mean, I suppose the episode where he was with the hostage, the guy who was taking his children hostage, I mean, was the way he reacted at the end more the actor's choice? So there's not really much. What do you think, Jack? I mean, how well, or should I ask Bradley? What do you think about G Junior? Is he well? Is he a particular type, or is it just like a general idea?
Well, to be fair, I'm not the best person to ask, because to me, everyone on the show is an STJ until proven otherwise. So
I kind of understand that. Yeah.
Well, obviously not Munch. Munch is obviously an STJ.
Yeah.
But,
No, I kind of understand what you mean, and when you mentioned Gardy, because when he first came on, originally I kind of thought ISTJ also, because of course you didn't see the first few seasons, but Bolander was Ned Beatty's character, the ISTJ that used to be Munch's partner, and there were some similarities with Gardy, but as he sort of speechified a little bit more over the time he was on the show, and you got a little bit more of an insight into his character, his priorities were different than Bolander, and it kind of came out that usually when he sort of made comments on things about society, about things going on, he made much more value judgments the way Bayless did, and less about the details of everything like Bolander. Bolander was like the recalling details of something from 1978, and here's and here's the. He was very much concerned with money, and and overall was just like the data. He was like the precise guy, whereas Gardy, comes off as a little bit more. Not that he's not concerned about details, but he's just a little bit more concerned about the values of things than he is on the facts. So that's what made me think he was ISFJ also.
Also, there was that episode that focused on his experience in Vietnam, and then Munch came about as far. Munch's apology was offering to buy him a drink. That's about as far as Munch could go.
Yeah, it makes sense. Type-wise, that those two would be in conflict if you think about it from the Myers-Briggs letters, because they would be exactly the opposite. ISFJ and an ENTP would have no preference in common, so that they would be naturally conflicting over things.
Yes, I mean, but theoretically, if they both round out, they'll get some similarities. But I can see how people where they've not rounded out and developed that other side to them, where they would be very different
on a basic level. When people that work with each other or know each other just a little bit, that if all the preferences are different, they are gonna appear like they don't have much in common.
Yeah. So, for instance,
people of the same type cannot also seem that way, but it's like we've said, other factors that don't have to do with the type.
Yeah. So, for example, you can have like someone who's an INTJ computer nerd and someone who's an ESFP sort of like stereotype, and if they've not got another side to them, then they're going to be poles apart. Whereas if you've got an INTJ person that wants to, it almost like wants to be like led out there and like actually do something exciting, and then the ESFP that has this other side to them, then they can come together. But they're usually more mature people who have rounded out. Of course, people can mature in other ways. What else?
I'm going to cut you off so we can get back to the episode.
Yes. That's what I meant by what else. Not what else like loads of typology. I meant what else back to the episode. So go on then, Bradley.
It's hard to know with you, Ben.
Yes. Past four. I do have previous.
All right. All right. So there's other characters. Oh, I completely forgot that Ballard and Falzone had a thing, because I hadn't mentioned it for a while. And when both the partners were going to be out of town, and they were like, I guess we both need partners. I was like, what do they mean by that? And I was like, oh yeah.
Oh.
Because I completely forgot.
There was a lovely touch from Callie Thorne when she reacted in a way to seeing Munch and his wife kiss him, where there was a little bit of I don't really want to see these middle-aged people kiss, because people in their 20s can be like that, where it's like, I don't want to see Munch kissing anybody. And it's sort of like, because you've seen her play. I've seen her in a comedy role, but I think like the thing that I saw her in, she was maybe slightly overplaying it. I think she could just sort of play it in the way she played it in Homicide. She'd be better. But I thought that was a nice bit from her, the way she played that scene.
Yeah, so I completely forgot about those two were having a thing. Lewis, I think it was, I guess, when Bayless confronted Lewis about, called him an ass for say being upfront with, I knew this case was a big deal because it's the first case he worked since the beatdown. And Shepard, like 2 seconds later, is like, you go ahead upstairs, Bayless. And Bayless didn't. He just called him out on it. But I think obviously, Lewis was out front. She nearly got me killed, and I had my right to my feelings about that. But because no one else had even confronted Lewis about being so passive aggressive, besides Bayless right then and there, and the nun being the forgiving type, and Falzone being you might want to try that approach. And for me, that basically, if any of that had happened, 6 months prior, basically they would be there'd be less of the cloud in the the elephant in the room that was Shepard almost getting Lewis killed, and Lewis being the only one who didn't want to work with her, and the whole like not talking about it, that whole thing would have been over a lot sooner if Bayless had just called him an ass, in my opinion. Because I think that the whole things that needed to happen, which should have happened, which didn't happen, basically could have happened at any point. But Bayless being on edge because the guy got released, that was the catalyst that provoked the rest of it. I thought that was sort of interesting, and I was wondering, what was going to resolve it, and I guess that sort of started it. What else? I think that's pretty much all I want to say about the episode. I don't remember much else.
Well, what you could say, Bradley, is what did you think of the first episode?
Oh, I mean, I liked it. Like, there wasn't much because it was the first episode, so it wasn't trying to. There wasn't much to it except for just showing off the characters, and Munch is just Munch. I've seen him in other shows, so I already sort of knew what he was about.
The Montel Williams bit was good, and then buried like a hamburger.
Yes, I'm not Montel Williams. And the guy's like, who's Montel Williams? I don't know who that is. And and the whole Munch being Munch, and I think Pemberton's being Pemberton as well. I mean, I haven't seen very much of him, but the two things I have seen is him being emotionally reactive, which is
I'll just want to say,
I guess
the thing with the car, I think if it was pretty much anybody else, it was because it was Felton. That's why it was like so determined to like get the car, and I just like the fact that Felton irked him.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, that well, I know enough about Pemberton to know how he reacts to other people. Apparently, he doesn't play well with others. And Bayless even said, Pemberton didn't have any friends. Shepard was like, he was your best friend. And then Bayless was like, he doesn't have any friends. I've talked to him maybe twice since he left. Yeah, I mean, people thought he was going to come back like he did last time, but he didn't, and no one heard from him again.
Well, they think he doesn't have any friends. It's just that he moves in a different circle. Like, there's been some intimations, like you see him with his wife, and then some of the other people that he goes out with. I mean, Frank's a little bit more. I mean, you could argue he's an elitist. And
he could be an elitist in practice, but not in. Makes any sense?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
You know, because he made a big deal about saying all life has value, and he doesn't see one dead person is more important than another. He made a point of saying that on many occasions. So he sees people as equal. But you're right in terms of in practice, he does kind of have this thing where he associates with certain people, and like we saw in season 6 with the James Earl Jones character, that he has more respect for black people he thinks have achieved something, as opposed to people he feels like have like wallowed in low circumstances or whatever. So it's obvious that he does have some prejudice there, but he still doesn't let that make him view like the people that he doesn't necessarily want to hang out with. He doesn't view them as lesser people, and that was the contrast he made with Felton, who had that view of, well, this dead guy was a drug dealer, so I don't really care about solving his murder as much as I do somebody who was like an innocent person, and so that was the contrast there that shows you that you can have that, and to me, as much as you can put the Jungian function stuff into practice, that to me seems like it would be an example of the difference in introverted versus extroverted feeling, in terms of Pemberton has a more consistent standard when it comes to the internal values about all people are equal, but he doesn't in practice. He sometimes can look like he's discriminating against people he feels like are lower class or whatever, whereas Felton actually relates more to the lower class people, but then he feels like in value wise, somebody who has made bad choices or whatever, is somebody who is in his view scum, basically doesn't deserve as much effort as somebody who is innocent. So by his standards,
I mean, you can have those two positions as well, where you can. I mean, I don't think that. Well, everyone's equal, but I prefer to hang out with these people.
Yeah, I mean that's, it makes perfect sense to me. But of course, I relate very strongly to Frank in character, so I can both very strongly not like it when I hear people using class warfare and talking condescendingly about like people that they view as inferior to them. I can have a problem with that.
Yeah.
And still have a viewpoint of, I don't want to hang out with drunk people, for instance.
Yeah.
Things like that. Where there's somebody could view it as me being elitist, but it really isn't that in terms of the way I view people. It's just, if I'm making a decision about who I'm going to spend time with, then there's people that I'm going to find more pleasant to spend time with than others.
Yeah.
That's who I'm going to want to choose.
Yeah, because it's like, you might also be thinking, well, these people are not in the right state of mind to appreciate my jokes, and they'll just laugh at anything.
Well, there's times in which that can be useful, but if I was actually going to be like a professional comedian or something, then I could still take advantage of that. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's just about. It's not about judging them. It's, as you said, it's just your experience of what you feel like being around drunk people.
But seeing the pictures scroll through. I'm sorry, are you saying?
No, it's not. Go over. I was pretty much just saying what you were saying, so I shouldn't have said it anyway.
Okay. Seeing the picture scroll through again sort of reminded me again that in the final episode, another strong job of casting the guest characters, and that everybody was very much convincing and fit. And so I looked this up because I wanted to finally, in the final episode, give credit. I looked up the casting directors, and it's actually 3 people. The 2 that they give credit for the entire series, and 1 who joined in 1995, and then so it's Louis DeJamo. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but I'm still trying to give Pat Moran and Brett Goldstein are the 3 people listed as casting directors. So wanted to give them some credit.
Oh yeah, I'm going to give them a round of applause. There we go. Round of applause for the good casting.
And like I said at the beginning of the broadcast, after I read that review, I think the best thing in this episode is Kyle Secor's performance. There's almost it's it's like the first time there's been definitely moments where Bayless has kind of emotional breakdowns or things like that in previous episodes. Even the stuff over where he holds the guy up in the convenience store with this gun. And so he's had those moments where he's had spontaneous reactions and stuff. But this is the scariest Bayless ever was, and Kyle Secor does a great job of selling that this guy is the culmination of these events have made him slightly unhinged, where he's not just he's having a bad day. Everything in this final episodes, from when he shot the guy, the homeless guy, and going into this and everything from the events of the past season or so, from the point where he got shot and Frank quit and all that, it's all led up to this like sort of moment of self-discovery where he's like, I'm not convinced all those things that I used to say. I at the beginning of the show, he said things so emphatically, this is right, this is wrong, these are the way. And Frank was the one who would point out like nuances or gray areas, and Bayless was the one saying, no, this is just truth. And here he is sitting here saying maybe everything that I thought was wrong. Maybe I don't know. Corsetti had a line in the first episode, since Bradley said he saw that now, where he talks about all our lives they've told us John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln. If that isn't true, then maybe nothing's true. And that's kind of the same place. Like I said, that's why I said there's a lot of callbacks, because even if they're not specifically the exact line is mentioned, those themes run throughout. And that's another thing I thought was great about this last episode is the actual murder case that is solved in the episode is very run-of-the-mill. It's like these people made choices that led them into this situation, and this is what happened, and the most obvious guy is the culprit. And so that was a recurring theme, that a lot of times things were pretty simple when it came to that. And so the juxtaposition of the guy who's done this, but he gets off on a technicality, and what the effect that has emotionally in the storylines versus the kind of run-of-the-mill case where the detectives kind of have to try to find something in that they can get something out of, because the actual facts of the case are very standard. Kind of, this is the kind of thing you put down, and then next week you're on to something else, because it's not, a huge impactful thing. But Lewis is able to get something out of it because he sees the nun's actions of forgiveness, and he thinks, maybe I've been too hard on Shepard. Maybe I should give her a chance. And there's other little, details in the dialogue, like Lewis saying the thing about, we talked about this back when they first kind of were having conversations about Lewis and Shepard, where he says, how come nobody can tell when I'm joking and when I'm being serious? And you don't know how many times that I've said that in my life. It seems to be, I don't maybe oversimplify if I say it's an SP thing, but it just seems like a really common, that chameleon aspect where we have the ability to kind of seem to change based on the circumstance and be super adaptable. But what it leads to is people aren't quite sure how to take us sometimes. They're not sure what things really matter to us and what things we're being serious about and what things we're joking about. So it's like, I've felt that so many times, where to me, times where it seems so obvious, but then people don't seem to get it.
But that could also be, he's using that as a tactic where he's changed his mind and said, "Oh, of course, I was joking."
Well, true, and it can be, which is why it's so hard to tell. That's why I understand why people are confused by that, and at the same time, I can still feel strongly in that moment that it seems like it's obvious to me. So those two things sound like a contradiction, but they're really not.
It's like when people are astounded that someone can lie in a situation, and it's like, no, it's just easy to an SP.
Yeah, well, I mean, and my favorite stand-up comedian, Norm Macdonald, had a line about that where he said, you ever just lie for no reason? And he's like, somebody will say, so did you see that movie with Paul Newman and the horse? And you go, yes. And then you think to yourself, I stand to gain nothing from this lie. So yeah, I always remembered that. like, because there's those times where just for whatever reason it felt like fun to make up a story or pretend to know something or do something,
But in terms of in terms of people knowing something, I know it was a bookend with the first episode where Bayless survived, but where is Bayless going in the last episode?
Well, they don't tell us that, do they?
Ooh, maybe it's in the TV movie.
That's why I have to. This is the tough part. I have to say this is that I have to view this episode with the lens of, like, I'm trying to view it as I did originally in terms of I'm not considering what happens in the movie when I'm looking at this episode.
Oh, now
because if I did consider what happens in the movie, I would rate this one much lower. But I'm taking it as its own individual episode.
Right.
And as it stands, it's great because it does leave things ambiguous in a lot of areas, and that again is that recurring homicide theme about that's what life is like,
So, at this point in the season, or did they know? Was their thought process like this? Well, this isn't the proper ending. The TV movie is the proper ending.
No, they didn't know there was going to be one yet.
Okay.
But the decision to have G turn down the promotion, I think that was probably done just in case there was another last-second change of heart and NBC brought the show back for another year.
Right.
That they wouldn't have to come up with an explanation for why G was, they didn't want to lose him as the shift commander if they did come back to have another season. So I think that's probably why they did that, because otherwise there wasn't really a strong reason why to have him do that, because if you're not really trying to launch something else, or have a spin-off about G or something, That's the funny thing is, as much as these other characters, they focused more on kind of their storyline and their personal growth and their values, whereas Munch, there wasn't a lot to that of his part in this episode. And so it's kind of funny that he ends up being the character that continues onto another show, whereas all the other ones, for the most part, didn't. There's, isolated cases like Lewis. I didn't see it, but apparently on the SVU episode where Munch retires, Lewis came to his retirement party. So, things like that where characters made brief appearances, but overall they weren't. And then, of course, the other interesting was apparently on The Wire, another show I haven't seen, but I've read things about it.
It's quite good.
Apparently, one of the characters on there was also based on the same real-life character that Munch is based on. So
wow.
There were two of them because Munch himself also appeared on that show, I think.
And is that guy also ENTP-ish, or is that more because Richard Bells is ENTP-ish?
Yeah, your sound cut out, so I didn't hear.
I was just saying, Jeff, because Richard Bells resembles ENTP in real life, and Munch's resembles ENTP, and this other guy that was based on the same guy that Munch was based on, is this other character also ENTP?
I don't know. Because like I said, I haven't seen it.
Right, okay.
So I really don't know.
One of the things in this episode, I just remembered now when you said about G and the promotion, and that made me think of a particular line that highlights the difference between ENTJs and ENTJs and ESTJs, and that's when he said that he didn't want a bird's eye view. And I think maybe ENTJs would want that bird's eye view of looking, being like part of a more control. What do you think of that, Jeff? Whereas the ESTJ wants to be at ground level more.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough because the ESTJs that I've known in real life, they've all been at one point or another business owners or aspired to be, but some of them have, sold a business and then gone back to work for somebody else. So it's not that they can't take a step down in some way. So the thing about ESTJs is, I think they're very well named by Kersey when they call them the supervisor type, because it's really like their basic function is to always be telling people what to do, and they're not happy unless they're doing that. But there's different ways they can do that. It doesn't necessarily have to be that they're the owner or the CEO of something. They can do that in other capacities. And I think with some of them, I think especially the older they get, they can kind of have that feeling of they want to so-called go back to basics. And that may have been sort of the feeling the G had in this situation, is that, yes, SJs in general and ESTJs especially want to rise to a higher level and get promoted, get to the high spot on the hierarchy. But this very strong sense of loyalty, and also very much are creatures of habit. They have a particular routine that they like and want to do things the same way. And so they don't really like change very much. So you've got those two things kind of going up against each other, where you're being offered promotion, but you're being offered it's a transfer to a different department. So it's like, I'll still be in charge, but I've got to learn new people, new procedures, new everything compared to what I've been doing the last 10 plus years.
Yep.
So I can see how it's still realistic and within G's character that he would decide that he would rather stay in Homicide, even if it meant staying as a lieutenant.
Do you think that, what do you think about, do you think ESFJs resist change as well, or is it just a general trait of Guardians, or do some Guardians resist change more than others?
I think they all do kind of in general, but there's probably some types of changes that are easier for some types to take. With ESFJs, I could see they might be more willing. But they could still have the same objection, but it would be more about the people. Probably it would be about, I've got to learn all these new people and learn what their all of their personal things, like all their birthdays and all their what are they interested in, what do I make small talk with them about, all those things that they've got to focus on in those relationships with people. And they're like, I've got to start from scratch with this if I move to a different place. So it may not be exactly the same things they'd be bothered by, but they could still conceivably be bothered the same way.
Yeah, I remember Kersey writing about something like, not only do they know the birthdays of their children, but they know the birthdays of their children's friends and things like that.
And even people, that are not even related to, but they're years ago. I've got, one of the restaurant managers that I talk with from time to time where I work as an ESFJ, and he's almost 60, and he's got this decades and decades of people that he just recalls stories about, and he could sit there the entire day and rattle off all these things. The funny part, though, is when he tells a story that he's told me many times and always starts it with just the other day. Like, it could be something that happened 10 years ago, and he describes it as the other day. But, yeah. Anyway, just as, I guess, some final notes about this episode, that the strong elements of Homicide are all present, and that's why, I enjoy this episode quite a bit, because it has a lot of the things that make Homicide great. Well-written dialogue, good character scenes, recurring themes about, life isn't fair, most criminals are stupid, but, you have people that are also very effective in pulling off murders, such as at the end where you have Luke Ryland dead and no evidence, which obviously is meant to suggest that someone who knows professionally how to murder someone and how to get away with it would be responsible. But of course, it's like you said, it's left ambiguous in this episode, and because there's not any much focus, you kind of wonder maybe what things were cut for time, whether the script did have something about more of a media reaction, more of a public outrage. Because if you had that, then you'd have a little bit more of kind of the feeling of somebody else who had, was outraged about Ryland getting off, decided to take him out. But you have, of course, no actual other suspects introduced. You're left to believe that it's Bayless because he's the one that they show the motivation for doing so.
Yeah, and also the way it's directed, you could have played that up a little bit more by having more of a lingering shot afterwards, and like the way you direct the actors to sort of play it. sort of key that. So I think they did that. So I would say this episode was good, but not in a way I expected or would prefer.
But one last thing I wanted to say about I think the Bayless Lewis confrontation was probably my favorite moment in the episode, because you really got both recalling past events, but also showing the personal growth, or at least personal journeys, of both characters and how it impacted the way they dealt with each other. So I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, so I give it about 8 out of 10. What do you give it, Bradley?
I give it about 9 out of 10. It was really, really good. I enjoyed it.
And I will give it a 10.
Ooh.
So there we go, 8, 9, 10. And thank you for joining us. And don't tune out, because we'll have more Homicide videos to come, even though the series proper, as Ben would say, is over. And we'll start off with next week. We'll do season 7 in review. So join us for that.
Oh, but what are we going to do? Wait a minute, folks. So we're going to do the season 7 review before we do the TV movie.
Yeah, I would say that's a good idea.
Then after that, folks, what's due to come is Al Giardello, Portrait of an ESTJ. And Jeff came up with that great title.
At some point, we'll do that. But yeah, it'll be next week, season 7 in review, and then probably 2 weeks after that, because I'm going to be out of town the next week. We'll do the movie,
and then we might do. And after Giardello, we might do Munch, and then we might do Frank. Right. So anyway,
we'll talk about that later. But anyway, to recap, our scores were 8, 9, and 10. Ben 8, Bradley 9, me 10, and join us for the season 7 in review next week.
Okay, bye-bye, folks.
Bye.
Bye.